Ted has told me and has told audiences the story about his dream. He's always wanted to do what he's doing, and it started with really nothing. I think he started in the red when he decided to do this. Maybe you can give him a little bit about that dedication to the dream that you had and how it started.
Sure. I started out in the stock market when I was 13 years old. I grew up in Willingboro, New Jersey. I had a teacher that brought a game into our classroom and taught us about the stock market. And it was one of those things that I got so interested in, I started asking my parents, how can I make this money in real life? And so I was a little different as a kid. I had a bunch of businesses. I delivered 2 newspapers. I had a lawn cutting business, but the lawn cutting business, I had like half the kids working in the neighborhood working for me with signed contracts, and I had my own business cards. I used to knock on doors and get people to sign a contract. And so the money I saved, my father opened an account for me. And my parents used to send me to the library every weekend. We didn't have the internet back then, so I had to go to the library and research a bunch of different stocks. And I found this company that nobody had really heard of at the time, but they were applying for legalized gambling in the state of New Jersey, and that was Resorts International. So I made a ton of money buying Resorts International. I bought a bunch of casino stocks, and at that point I decided, okay, I know what it is that I want to do for a living. And so I went to Rutgers, majored in economics and finance. I got hired March of my senior year for the July class, which is actually where I've been at what was then Dean Witter, now Morgan Stanley. I've been there for the last 27 years. And so when I first got hired, I really, really struggled in the business. I mean, we were in the business. Here I am, I'm 21 years old. I look like I'm 15 years old. I'm trying to get people to give me their money. Nobody would take me serious. I'm cold calling old folks at night while they're sitting there trying to have dinner, begging if I can, sell them a stock. And that wasn't working out so well. So I came across the idea of maybe if I try to find a certain target, I can sort of become the expert in this target market. So I started going after architects and engineers. And quite frankly, I realized I had absolutely nothing in common with them, and that just didn't work out well. And so I moved on and said, well, maybe I'll learn about auto dealers. I tried that, but they were going through a difficult period at the time. Car sales had really been declining. Nobody really had any money, so then I tried going after franchise owners. And I even joined an organization called Women in Franchising, which I know y'all looking at me, but hey, it was the only franchise organization I could find at the time. That didn't work out either. Most of them didn't have a lot of money. In the meantime, I had just bought a house. There were a couple of guys living in the neighborhood that were playing for the Eagles, and unfortunately one of the guys tore his ACL. I started hanging out with the guys. I'm not a sports fan. I knew absolutely nothing at all about sports. So one of the guys tore his ACL and that I was hanging out with, and realized that was the end of his career. And then he found out all the years he was playing, the person he was paying to handle his financial affairs never filed his taxes and was stealing his money. And so he ended up moving in with me. I was kind of struggling too, and so that's kind of how I got into the sports business, was I started teaching him about how to manage his money, and he started teaching me about the sports world. But back to the issue of dedication to the dream. I had this mentor when I first got in. Unfortunately, sometimes you have good mentors, sometimes you have bad mentors. But my mentor told me that if you want to be successful, if you really want to make a lot of money, you got to be like me. So he said, what kind of car are you driving? And I said, I had a big station wagon. I think you only see it in the movies nowadays, but I had this big station wagon that fit like 15 people in it, with wood panels on the side and a seat that faced backwards. And he said, nobody's going to take you serious driving that kind of car. You got to go out and get a car. So I went out and I bought a new car. I bought a new Hyundai. Remember, I'm making $18,000 a year at the time. So I passed the Series 7, which is the exam that you pass to become a stockbroker. And he called me the day I passed the exam and said, so you still living at home with your parents? And I said, well, that's part of the reason I took the job in South Jersey, so I could save some money and live with my parents. And he said, no. See, you need to learn responsibility. You need to go out and buy a house. Because if you buy a house, you'll learn responsibility, you'll have some debt, that'll make you work harder, and so you'll make a lot of money. So I went out and I bought a house. House cost me $60,000. Once again, like I said, I was making $18,000 a year. So I get into the house, And as soon as I get into the house, he says, well, you know, you're going to receive applications for credit cards. And, you know, if you want people to take you serious, then you need to dress nice. And I suggest you put money on the credit cards because, see, this will make you work harder and you'll make a lot of money. Well, he's a successful broker. I'm saying, hey, I want to be just like this guy. So I took his advice. And then October 19th, 1987, the stock market crashed. Nobody wanted to hear a thing from a stockbroker anymore. Nobody wanted to do business with a stockbroker, especially one who's 21 years old, looks like he's 15, and nobody wants to take serious. So that part became difficult, but as if that wasn't enough. My father went back to, dropped out of high school at the age of 15, ultimately went back to school at the age of 27, ultimately ended up running the entire New Jersey school system, and then was accused of stealing money. And unfortunately, fortunately, the case was completely thrown out as bogus, but it made the front page of several major newspapers. And so imagine, my real name is Octavius Reid. If at the beginning of your career, the front page of several major newspapers reads, Octavius Reid mismanages funds. So here I am, the market's just crashed. I'm way in debt. I own a house, a car, I'm making $18,000 a year. I don't know how I'm going to survive at this point. And as if that wasn't enough, the way we get paid in our business is that we're sort of an entrepreneur. We keep a portion of the money that we generate for the firm. And on average, that's probably somewhere between 30 to 40%. But I was 5 years into the business at this point. I was really struggling, still trying to make it, still trying to figure how I was going to get myself out of debt. And it was about 3 days before Christmas. And I go to my mailbox at the office, and there's a memo in our mailbox that went to every broker in the firm that said, if you've been at the firm for 5 years and you're producing less than X amount of revenues, then your payout is going to drop to 20%. Meaning if I was generating $100,000 in revenue where I would have made 30 grand, I'm now down to 20 grand. So I go home and I'm very depressed that day because I'm not even getting anywhere close to that. And I decide I was like, you know what, I just got to go out for a minute and get away from all this. So I go to the ATM, and unfortunately I wasn't able to get my money out of the ATM because ATMs don't distribute anything less than $10. So I couldn't get my money out the ATM. But I used to have this theory, never spend your change. And so every night I would come home and I had this little silver cup, which I still have, and I used to dump all my change into this cup. So I took all the change that I had and I went to Cherry Hill Mall and I went to the Cinnabon. And I'm sitting at the Cinnabon and I'm looking. Remember, I said this was 3 days before Christmas, and this was right around 1990, and at the time, you know, Salt and Pepper was the big group out there, so everybody was wearing sort of the same style. So I'm sitting in Cherry Hill Mall, and I'm looking at all these folks walking around with these big gold earrings, long leather trench coats, carrying about 6 bags apiece, getting on the bus. And I'm thinking to myself, what's wrong with this picture? I went to college for 4 years. I've been a stockbroker for 5 years, and I can't afford a cup of coffee and a Cinnabon. And I'm watching these folks that probably didn't even finish high school, and they're walking around with big gold earrings, long leather trench coats, and everything else. So I didn't come back to work for a couple of days. And I went into my manager's office right after Christmas, and he said, what happened to you? You know, we haven't seen you in a while, thinking you left. And I said, well, I kind of put myself in a room. I actually went into my room, I unplugged the television, I unplugged the radio, and I sat in front of a legal pad for 3 days. And for 3 days, all I did was start writing down all the people that I knew that were successful and all the people that I knew that had failed out of the business. And I started writing down all the characteristics of each of them. And I went into my manager and I said, listen, I need you to do me a favor. Right now, you're paying me, I was getting a salary plus commissions, but it was really a draw of $1,000 a month at that point. And I said, I need you to do me a favor. I'm willing to work a deal with you. And I handed him an envelope, and the envelope was my letter of resignation. And he said, what's this? I said, it's my letter of resignation, but it's dated exactly 1 year from today. If you do this deal with me, here's the deal. What I want you to do is to not only put my payout back at 30% from 20, but give me a $500 raise. You give me the $1,500 a month. I ended up getting a part-time job at UPS in the meantime. I actually waited tables over the weekends. I did what I had to do. But I said, you do that, I promise you I will double my revenues in 12 months. If I don't double my revenues, you can take that envelope. And he said, well, you're putting a lot on the line. I said, man, I got nothing to lose. And so 12 months later, I walked into him and I went from doing $120,000 revenue to $250,000 revenue. I'm sorry, I went from 60 to 122. The following year, I walked back into his office and I handed him another envelope. He looked at me like, he was like, well, what's this about? And I said, well, I'm gonna do it again. He said, well, you don't really have to this time. I said, yeah, but I want to. And I went from 122 to 250 that year. And the following year, I walked back in and I handed him an envelope. And it's funny, I was telling this story, I never heard my manager curse a day in his life. And I handed him the envelope and he's like, what's this? He said, man, get out of my office. But the point was that I had decided, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do since I was 13, and it was not time to give up at that point. Sorry to take so long on the story.
No, and that's great. That's a great story because it talks about the commitment to one's dream and how dedicated you need to be to get there. It also talks about taking calculated risks and how taking those risks at the right time can lead to greatness.